And in science, with only 1 in 10 heads of state being. This week's listener Paula from Kenya wants to know why. Are there any innate qualities that make men or women better at certain jobs? This is the BBC World Service, the world's radio station.
You could say traditionally / stereotypically, but...
Hi, I'm Rory Catherine-Jones, and on today's Tech Tent, Facebook and the Australian government come to a compromise over making the social media giant pay for links to news content. So who backed down, and is the outcome something that other countries will want to copy?
What countries are wanting to do is to get some of that value sent back to the content creators and providers.
That's all
Precedent has been established, so why wouldn't other countries at this point line up to get their piece of the pie?
Plus, throwaway electronic gadgets are a growing problem. We'll hear how circuit boards that dissolve in water might help to reduce waste. And have internet influencers helped save many businesses during the lockdowns?
Depends how you phrase that question and frame that question answer. So I guess anybody that watches these is used to them getting interrupted. That's okay. If you watch them in past tense, you can skip right through all the shitty parts. And somewhere here, somebody else will say something smart that I do not take any credit or copyright type interest in. Except for the really good stuff that belongs
To capture or kill Jamal Khashoggi.
Except for the really good
The partially
stuff that
redacted
belongs to the
two-page
whole of
report did not
humanity.
cite direct evidence. Rather, its conclusions
The ones
based
that
on the
came
Crown
speech.
Prince's control of decision-making in the kingdom, the participation of key members of his protective detail, and his support for using violent measures to silence dissidents abroad. In declassifying the report, President Joe Biden reversed the refusal of the Trump administration to do so and reflected a new willingness to challenge Saudi Arabia on human rights issues.
In a further development, the U.S.
United
Treasury has
Nations
announced a
TV.
raft of sanctions in
real
connection
close.
with Mr.
That was real
Khashoggi's
close,
murder.
but I clicked
Those
on it.
targeted include the Saudi Royal Guard's Rapid Intervention
What would it
Force
be
and
watching
former
that work?
senior
I'm so
intelligence
upset if it
officials.
doesn't work.
Myanmar's
upset, just
representative to the
disappointed.
UN has urged other nations
Oh.
not to recognize the military takeover of the country. He told the UN General Assembly no one should cooperate with the Burmese army until it handed back power to the democratically elected government. Paul Adams reports.
This was a remarkable show of defiance by Myanmar's UN ambassador.
Defiantly.
Tung urged the entire world to stop the military coup. The UN...
Hold on, United Nations Radio, TV.
Je suis activiste pour l'environnement. J'ai peur que nos mauvaises habitudes reprennent. Qu'est-ce que nous pouvons faire ensemble pour préserver
Get
notre...
back to it, we will.
government, and at one point held up 3 fingers, a gesture adopted by anti-coup protesters. As he finished, applause echoed across the General Assembly.
The Nigerian President Muhammadu Buhari has warned the kidnappers of more than 300 schoolgirls that his government won't give in to blackmail. Police believe the girls have been moved to a forest after being snatched by gunmen early
First
on
Nation of
Friday.
Canada send a couple
Here's
representatives
Grant
over
Ferret.
with
Mr.
whatever
Buhari condemned the latest in a wave of abductions
tools and
of school
tactics we
children
can bring
as
to the table
inhumane.
and just
But according to his spokesman,
Let us run
President
loose in
Buhari
our
said
country for,
patience
like,
was needed to
6
ensure that
months.
the girls were not harmed. Describing the kidnappers as bandits, he said they should not interpret the government's restraint as a sign of weakness. He also urged state governments to review their policy of, as he put it, rewarding bandits with money and vehicles. But there are many in Nigeria who believe that the repeated security failures are
we got
ultimately
ways
the
around
fault of
that
Mr.
too.
Buhari and his administration.
Yes, we do.
World news from the BBC. The United States has dropped a Trump administration proposal that was widely seen as blocking an international agreement on the taxation of digital commerce. The U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen said Washington would no longer call for firms to be allowed to opt out of new rules. The proposal had frustrated negotiators to make big tech companies pay more tax in the countries where their economic activities take place, rather than where they're headquartered. The UN Security Council has unanimously approved a resolution demanding an immediate ceasefire in armed conflicts across the world so that COVID-19 vaccines can be delivered. Donna Mcculloch reports.
This new resolution demands that parties to armed conflicts engage immediately in a durable, extensive, and sustained humanitarian pause to allow for the equitable, safe, and unhindered delivery of COVID-19 vaccinations. The pause does not apply to operations against militant groups designated by the Security Council. It also says the Council will review situations raised by the UN Secretary General and will consider additional measures to remove any impediments to enabling vaccinations.
Parliament in Senegal has voted to remove the immunity from prosecution of a high-profile opposition MP who has been accused of rape. Usman Sonko, who came third in the last presidential election, has denied the allegation. He insists he's the victim of a plot by the Senegalese president, Macky Sall. The president has described the claim as absurd. The Interior Ministry in North Macedonia says 7 police officers have been injured in a protest by ethnic Albanians in support of 5 men they say were framed for sectarian murders. At the end of a lengthy retrial on Tuesday, they were convicted of killing 4 young ethnic Macedonians and an older fisherman by a lake in 2012. The judge called it a monstrous, sadistic killing. BBC News.
Hello and welcome to Tech Tent, your weekly guide to all the hottest news and trends from the technology world. I'm Rory Catlin-Jones, and this week in Australia, it's now the law. Tech giants like Facebook and Google must now pay for news content. So should other governments go down the same path? We hear 2 diverging views. Ever wondered what happened to all the e-waste in redundant gadgets? An inventor tells us how water-soluble circuit boards will be the answer. And influencers, people made famous by Instagram and other platforms, don't get a great press, but have they been a lifeline for small businesses? Joining me this week is BBC technology reporter Zoe Kleiman. Hi Zoe, what's
32 stations before they fall out of the bottom.
Us to be there for children before, during, and after emergencies. It also enables UNICEF to pioneer innovative programs that support children across childhood and adolescence. And it helps us support communities as they build stronger systems for the future. Systems that support health, nutrition, water, sanitation, education, and protection. All of the ingredients that children need to grow.
I have decided to die on a cross. Mais il a dit, j'ai décidé de mourir sur une croix. And he decided when to die. Il a même décidé de quand. He was nailed to the cross at 9 o'clock in the morning. Il a été cloué sur une croix à 9 heures du matin. But he was dead at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Mais il était mort à 3 heures de l'après-midi. The cross did not kill Jesus. Ce n'est pas la croix qui a tué Jésus. A cross cannot kill a man in 6 hours. Il est impossible pour une croix de tuer un homme en 6 heures.
Oh,
It takes a minimum of 2 days. Il faut un minimum
I swear
de...
to God, I wasn't taking an argument that with you.
The Netherlands, Spain, Sweden, and the United Kingdom. With your help,
all slavers,
we will
the
build
Swedes.
back better for every child.
It's too cold to keep slaves. Never mind, that was probably not historical.
Hi, my name is Hamisa. I'm 5. I live in Cairo, Egypt. Today I'm going to show you my day in the lockdown. I like to have my breakfast here and enjoy sometimes. I like to do yoga after that. Sometimes I'm a superhero. Sometimes I'm a princess.
Why can't I get rid of one at a time?
I'm a rock star. Oh, I'm a dad. Yay! Sometimes I'm a ballerina. Sometimes I like to cook like my mom.
There's more of them here.
Sometimes I make some arts and crafts. Like this one. Sometimes
What is this kid talking about? French to English to a little kid.
Les banques dans le viseur du gouvernement, selon Elisabeth Borne, elle ne joue pas assez le jeu du télétravail. Le secteur était convoqué à une réunion aujourd'hui avec la ministre. On sera avec le secrétaire adjoint FO, banque et sociétés financières. Après le fil info, 21h10, Boris Allier.
Du changement pour l'Olympique de Marseille. Face à la crise et à la colère des supporters, le propriétaire du club, Franck McCourt, réagit. Le président de l'OM, Jacques Henriet.
But he says he can pay it. But that's not the point. The point is that there are other people for whom this is really becoming a surprise or a shock, that now you're crossing, whereas you thought maybe you were essential because you were getting licensed to go back and forth with a work permit or a visa. But the rules have changed. That's what he's really ticked about, the fact that they changed the rules without any advance notice, imposing the Quarantine Act to the strictest letter of the law. He's deemed to be non-essential. And boy, oh boy, this is where you lose faith with the government and the fact that they roll these things out arbitrarily or without notice, any kind of advance publicity, or it's in very fine print. And I understand his frustration. Which is why I'm saying to myself, you know, with Quebec already going to open rinks and things, but you know what they're also doing? They're issuing passports, vaccine passports. And we've got all these vaccines coming online, as has been promised. Now it's really going to be incumbent upon the province to roll those out in an orderly fashion. They're going to be swamped, but let's just hope and pray that they have their affairs in order and we can get the jabs into people's arms. I did some arithmetic. I mean, we're going to get everybody in this province, let alone country, but let's just focus on a province vaccinated by, let's say, late summer. We're going to need 50, 60,000 jabs daily, every day, 7 days a week. However, you just multiply times, well, let's call it a 6-month window, 180 days. Do the math. If we've got, and you're not going to get it into 16-year-olds yet because the vaccines aren't prepared, although they are coming up somewhere further down the line for kids, as I understand it. But right now, they're not being vaccinated. They're not a priority. And we've got people who are going to be hesitant or resistant for whatever. And then you've also got the nominal sum who've already been vaccinated. In the province of Ontario, that ain't a great number. And I think it's, what is it, 800,000 maybe? Anyway, in the whole country, it's just 1.72 million, but still, if we have to really ramp it up to that extent, I'm willing to make my peace with it. I know some people will not get the vaccine. They're hesitant for whatever reason. You may just, you know, think that it's been a rush job. You're reluctant to. Maybe you've got other health considerations. Women seeking to get pregnant, there's a whole lot of that involved. But if it means having access to travel, like Buddy across the border, if you've got a vaccine passport and the United States recognizes that, because they're having bilateral talks, as I understand it now. Mark Garneau and who was it, Blinken or Blinkfine or something? He's a States guy. He's their new, what do you call him, Secretary of State. They've been discussing these matters, cross-border matters. Now, we'd like to get to the States. I don't know about you, and in a non-essential way. And if that means getting a passport to do so, or getting a passport to attend things like ball games, concerts.
We not had these rules since about.
I don't find any resistance on my part. How about you? I'll ask, because this is something I'm quite curious about. It's going to be contentious insofar as is this too official?
Is that kid gone? This is United Nations TV. Don't say UNICEF. Experience a day in the school.
Online, wherever they are. It began as a tool to provide remote learning for displaced and refugee children. And now we're expanding the platform, opening it to school districts around the world. Kosovo, Timor-Leste, and Ukraine,
you don't have to turn the volume down on the stream because it's loud on your end.
Transmission of the virus are the first to join. The Learning Passport helps children in 3 ways. One, it helps children continue learning, no matter where they live, by providing digitized curricula with textbooks and other content in their national language.
It's going to be digital.
2, it captures a record of the subjects that each student learns and allows them to carry that achievement with them.
One of these in English. Here we go.
Attention to the White House.
US President Joe Biden's now got involved. He signed an executive order tasking his team to find ways to bolster supply chains of the chips as the global shortage continues to bite. It turns out you can get chips with almost everything. Well, you could, but demand is now considerably outstripping supply. The firms which make them are struggling to keep up, and this is having an impact on the availability of a number of consumer goods, including cars and PlayStation 5s. The US accounts for 47% of the global chip market, but only 12% are made on US soil. And while the US-China trade war has been a factor here, China's also having its own problems getting its hands on enough of the right chips.
Yeah, this is going to be a continuing story which we'll keep across here. Pokemon Go was the hit mobile game a few years ago. It made augmented reality a really big thing. But what's this about millions of people cheating?
The creators of Pokemon Go have announced that they've punished more than 5 million players for cheating. Not just sneaky Pokemon Go players, though, Rory. Niantic said the number included players of Ingress and Harry Potter Wizards Unite as well.
Not Harry Potter Wizards Unite.
Can you believe it? Nothing is sacred. It also said that more than 20% of those, so about 1 million of those, were permanent bans. Now, in case you're wondering how on earth you can cheat at Pokemon Go, well, you can get unofficial programs to spoof your location and help you find those more elusive creatures. You didn't hear that from me, of course.
Yes, just how people are managing to travel the world playing Pokemon Go right now. It's quite interesting. And one more story. You can't be too careful about what you say on a video conference call, as a Californian school board has learned.
Picture the scene, Rory. You and I are having a private chat about our frustrations at work. Not
Would never happen.
Only to find that everyone we are talking about is also on the call. That's what happened to the board members of Oakley Union Elementary School in California. Now, they were happily letting off steam about parents wanting their babysitters back, and even suggesting they wanted some quiet time to indulge in recreational drug taking while their children were in school. And they didn't realise the whole meeting was being live
It's okay for the
streamed.
teacher's brother.
Needless to say, the entire board has now resigned, and I guess they've learned that lesson that we broadcasters know only too well, which is to be very careful what you say.
This could be a glorious comeuppance, so we'll get to all of that. But first, to your thoughts. 870-6400 to weigh in on the Oakley Show. Vaccine passports, good idea or no? 870-6400. In right quick fashion, we'll take a flurry of fast calls in moments at Global News Radio 640 Toronto.
Back in my day, we walked in the snow, uphill, both ways. Nowadays, you kids whip around in your Jeeps with your 4x4 capability and your I can go anywhere attitudes.
What's your point, Grandpa?
Well, you're going to show me what this thing can do.
As you can see, many of these makeshift houses have been destroyed. In the middle of the night, around 1 o'clock in the morning, the community decided, because the sea was coming closer, to take the children and the old people to a nearby school. The roof of the school we are looking at here had just been repaired after Cyclone Idai that hit the city 2 years ago, and you can see it's gone again.
Viaggi na segunda-feira, pegou de água. Lá no casa aí água encheu muito. Estamos sofrendo com criança.
It's a bit like a deja vu experience for us here in the same school. We had many displaced people 2 years ago. Now we are out here with our colleagues to assess the situation and the most urgent needs. Luckily, we have pre-positioned stocks that can quickly be distributed, but there's again a lot of work ahead here in central Mozambique.
In the United States, our buildings are responsible for over 40% of carbon emissions. People aren't aware of this. You know, we think about our cars.
Well, what's odd is that 60% is traveling around to your fucking buildings.
silently around us. All of our buildings, our homes, our office buildings, schools, hospitals, they're all burning energy. And that is a big part of the climate problem. I'm a very active proponent, I guess, of Passive House, because it's just clear to me that it's a very powerful way to transform buildings into a form of climate action. In the clean energy space, we're seeing solar panels and wind just plummeting cost and performance rising really rapidly. We need to take a cue from that and harness science essentially to build better buildings, and that's what Passive House does. In order to meet the Paris Accord targets, we need to flatten out emissions by 2020 and then see emissions reduced by half every decade afterward.
To what end? Why? What are you talking about? Your modeling doesn't take anything proper into account.
The moral imperative for action is clear. All of us, governments, businesses, consumers, will have to make changes. More than that, we will have to be the change.
So it blocks the sun. I am an environmentalist. I was an engineer for about 10 years. I have been now in construction for about 10 or 11 years. I like to work with my hands, and I like construction a lot, and wanted to take it to sort of another level, to really do something meaningful in the community. Once you build a house, hopefully it's going to last for a very long time, and you kind of have one opportunity to really fix the energy consumption of the house. And you lock in that energy consumption for 100 years. And so for me, that was a very compelling idea. So we decided to do this house that way. So it is an airtight house, and so we have continuous ventilation. So we're delivering fresh air to the house all the time.
So it's not airtight. Is it airtight or is it not airtight? See, and this is what fucks people up. Doesn't have to be airtight, it just has to be.
Might be a little challenging to film in here. So this is the heat recovery ventilator. It's bringing in incoming fresh air from outside, and it's filtering that air. So this is delivering fresh air to the house continually.
But it has like a heat pump that sucks if it's. It'll dump the heat into the exhaust air or into the intake air, depending on whether it's hot or cold outside. But of course, that takes refrigerants, so you're exposing the indoor air to 410A theoretically, which can cause heart attacks. So much over that.
The Passive House movement is really taking off across the Northeast and across the United States. What we are doing here in New York, we're trying to create a market to do very deep retrofits of existing buildings. The first piece of the equation for me is really reducing the energy we consume. Once you reduce the energy you consume in your building by 50, 60, 70%, then it becomes much easier and possible to meet that energy demand with renewable energy, be it solar, be it wind farms.
There's a real possibility that Passive House could scale up quick enough to create a zero net carbon built environment by 2050, which is what we need to do.
I'm sure it was the same thing when the first houses had to be plumbed and have electricity. Oh, this is a stupid idea, and we're never going to be able to, it's too expensive, you know, right? I mean, it's the same thing. It's just we're working on how to make the energy more sensible.
Things rich people had, other people wanted.
Global 3000, thanks for joining us. Women doing traditionally male jobs, long inconceivable in Syria, but the long-running war has shaken everything up. The effects of the coronavirus pandemic continue to reverberate. South Africa's wildlife reserves are struggling to survive. And we meet the babies in Ukraine waiting for their parents. Why aren't they coming to collect them? Whether hetero or homosexual, many couples worldwide share the same dream, to have a baby. For some, though, this doesn't happen naturally, and that's where surrogacy can come in. Surrogate mothers become pregnant and bear a child on behalf of someone else, usually for a fee. Surrogate.
But do the comments show a level of purchase intent? Do they show a certain positive sentiment or a negative sentiment? But then from the sales angle, you can see directly from how a campaign's performing, because you can see a sales uplift from the number of direct sales a post has actually got.
Ben Jeffries there. And finally, here's Donna Mcculloch. She's a fashion stylist who's had to rethink her entire business because of the pandemic. And having been apprehensive about doing influencer work, she's now taken the plunge and has just done her first 2 campaigns.
Whilst I had lots of colleagues who were doing influencing work, I always shied away from it. However, the pandemic made me think differently. And also, once you reach a level, 10K, the magic 10K, is when you get taken much more seriously by brands, whether or not you have already have a lot of experience in your field. Actually, the 10K is what matters to the brands. They quite like the 10K because they call you micro influencers, so they feel like you still have some influence without being saturated. It feels really great when the brand comes back to you and goes, the orders are just flying off the shelf here, Donna. Thanks so much for all your work and your creativity. You think, great, I've done a really good job. But also I really believed in the product, and the product kind of spoke for itself. So it was just how I delivered it, the information, and how I reach my audience. And I shared it to Facebook as well, because I thought, you know what, they're missing a trick here. Most of people on Facebook, because it's an older demographic, wear glasses. Let's just share it on Facebook, and of course that boosted sales again. And they hadn't asked me to do that, but I just did it.
So that was Donna Mcculloch.
And we'll all end up on a watch list of the NSA. But it's okay,
as I said, slightly jokingly, these people don't get a great press. We did think they were all over, maybe. Then there was a lot of schadenfreude about the idea that the pandemic had exposed them for what they were, and that they were not necessary. But you seem to be showing that actually they are playing a role, and they
certain vaccine proof, validation, having your shots when you travel to foreign lands. They just implement that as a rule, and so you get them dutifully. So is this any different? That's the question. Or is it really more government intrusion? As to cost, I can't see there being a cost affix to it, because the vaccines are being rolled out and the taxpayer is paying for them. That's you and me. What did they say? The latest here, I guess, the AstraZeneca one is about $4 a hit. And many of these vaccines are made available at cost. So that's the good news today on the matter of potential. Look, I was citing this guy, and we're trying to get a hold of him, the construction owner, who suddenly was ticketed $3,755, whereas before he was crossing the border, Windsor, Detroit, and back, maybe once every 2 weeks, once a week. And now they've deemed him non-essential because he's not going over every day. By the way, anybody have that same experience? I'm kind of curious. Let me get the mic on a 401. Michael, hi there. Oakley Show. Good afternoon.
Yeah, welcome back to Canada Radio. Long story short, I'm a commercial truck driver. I crossed the border.
No radio. Canadian vaccine clinic, no vaccines. Canadian dairy, we dump 30,000 liters of milk down the drain.
There are roadways that you must have to the border protection.
Canadian bridge, out of service.
They're not going to let us in.
Canadian lockdown, everybody's on the street. Canadian quarantine. Don't know what you want.
Horseshoe lollipops and roads. The guy in the truck. If you're not going to get it, because people will be allowed in.
Hey, Mike, I'm guessing you're considered essential, right?
Well, yeah, I've been working 70-hour weeks since this started. I'm 13 days off, 1 day off, and 13 on, 1 day off.
You know what I would do for that?
Back in the truck, over the border, back and forth, running all over Canada and the U.S.
I would just wire up my house to my truck digitally, wirelessly.
Right. When you say you cross 3 times a week, The other guy, the construction guy, was crossing like maybe once a week, and they deemed that he was non-essential because he wasn't doing it every day. So I just wonder if they're still giving you some kind of grace here or latitude, even if it's 3 times a week.
I got an email from U.S. Border Protection and Canada Customs that I am exempt from quarantine all kind of stuff because I'm classified essential. When this all started, they took all of our information and they put us in the system. Every time I cross the border, I get emails from the government. And, you know, blah, blah, quarantine or whatnot, but because I'm a
I get that when I use my bank card.
I'm exempt. But it doesn't mean
the trick is you got to steal less than $1.
run around the neighborhood and do whatever the hell I want. I come home, I get my groceries, I go home, and I can't leave the house.
Canadian Flash debit card, there's no flash.
All right, I got it. Yeah. Hey, listen, Mike, Safe Travel's very appreciative of your doing the almost during the pandemic. Stay safe. Let me grab another call. Alan Woodbridge here on the Oakley Show. Good afternoon, Al. Your turn.
Barbarium, whatever.
Hey, how you doing?
Pretty good, thank you.
Listen, you know what? We can't let this happen. Would I take the jab? No. This is not the bubonic plague, for God's sakes. This is a bad virus, okay? I'm not an anti-vaxxer, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist as far as viruses are concerned, but it's not the bubonic plague, okay? If we start allowing the government to do things like this and give us cards and give us stamps that we have to present, okay, in order to get entrance into whatever it is, ballparks, certain shows, or traveling, we can't do this because, you know, we've gone from the coronavirus and then we went to a new variant, okay? Now we've made that new variant a worrying variant, and it's snowballing. What is it going to be next? So we'll end up getting the jab, and all of a sudden there's going to be a new worrying variant that this jab, guess what? It's not going to help. Well, now we got to get another one. And it's just going to snowball. It's going to go on and on and on. And this just, you know, it just turns my stomach. It turns my stomach terribly to even hear of this.
Well, I'm telling you, this is why I bring it to your attention. The prospects of this happening are very real, and I just wanted to get the sense that whether people will make some kind of, I call it a devil's bargain, maybe compromise your principles, your ideals, to think, geez, I want to go to a game or a concert or whatever, or I want to travel to Ireland. Let's just pick any country where if they have this, they're insistent on this as a precondition for getting in. Some people will actually accept that as a willing kind of a trade-off, and you're saying you don't want to do that. So this is what's going to happen, or potentially could happen. As I say, Quebec seems to be going that route, and they're saying for travel mainly, travel purposes, it's like a QR code, which again has sort of eluded me as to what that is. I guess they've implemented that in the past. Or countries do have this when it is a case of traveling to foreign nations. You know, I'll leave that. I'm going to pick that up a little later in the program with the panel as well, get them to weigh in on this, whether passports, a vaccine passport is a reasonable assumption. There's another point I think that needs to be made when it comes to the law, and that is with the internet now. And people can say just about anything. When it comes to defamation, the Ontario Superior Court recognized a new tort the other day when it comes to online harassment, much to the relief of many people who have been targeted, needless to say. We're going to find out exactly what went down and what it all means next here on the Oakley Show. Global News Radio, 640 Toronto.
And now it's time for Good News. Brought to you by Honda, of course. At the Dream Garage event on for a limited time, all you have to do is hurry to your nearest Honda dealer, and you can get $3,000 in cash incentives on any 2020 Civic sedan model. Hold on, I think I read that wrong. Nope, says it right here. $3,000 in cash incentives. Now that really is good news. And I would know. Conditions apply.
And then there was the most recent ex-president of the United States who spoke about women like this.
I gotta use some Tic Tacs just in case they start kissing her.
I'm automatically attracted to beautiful. I just start kissing them. It's like a magnet. You just right on the way. And when you're a star, they let you do it. You can do anything.
And here's Hillary Clinton, who ran against him, facing the heckle, "Iron my shirt," at a rally.
Some people think you bring about change by demanding it, and some people think you bring about change by, oh, the remnants of sexism alive and well.
You're listening to Crowd Science, a science show. You may be failing to see the connection to science, but bear with me. Crowd Science explores the world around us in response to a listener question. And listener Paula, who lives in Kenya's capital, Nairobi, couldn't help but notice that men and women are treated very differently, and men seem to have the upper hand. More power, more freedom, more pay. She wondered if there was any scientifically studied underpinning to this inequality, and sent in one of our more challenging questions.
I'd like to find out why men rule the world.
Okay. Can I ask about your profession? You're a computer scientist and you're a lecturer in computer science. I mean,
yes,
that is currently
I
quite a male-orientated profession. How did you get into that?
When I got my first job, there were very few women. I remember we were just
two
women in our team, in the
Like,
technical team of
not even a
engineers.
joke.
I was
We're
employed
not
as a
built for
network engineer.
survival. We're not.
You sometimes
Those guys are always subtly adjusting their clothes, subtly.
time has
We're
come.
not trying to be creepy about
They're
it. but it's
irreplaceable when it comes to reconstruction. There is more than enough for everyone to do after 9 years of war in Syria.
So you gotta sit down halfway, stand up
Repression
again,
and
and sit down, and you
discrimination
didn't
are
see him
part
do
of life
anything. He
for many
adjusted
women
something.
around
He
the
was
world.
polite about it.
On our new Facebook channel,
Well, Bob,
DW
since you
Women,
asked, I
you'll
have to
find
move my
stories
nut out
about
of the way
those
of getting
taking a
squished on
stand
the
and
seat. That
inspiring
would have
others to
destroyed
do the
this
same.
next generation. Wouldn't it? Survival
DW
of the
Women
fittest.
gives a voice to the women
I
of
don't
our
think so. It
world.
don't fit.
And now we head to Mexico, a country deemed to be one of the world's most dangerous. Last year, Mexico recorded 36,000 murders and 60,000 missing people. Most of the violence is linked to drug cartels, but it can also devastate the lives of those trying to be a force for good. 2019 saw 23 environmental activists killed. Their efforts to protect the country's plant and animal life got in the way of those whose priority is making a profit.
Eastern and Western world on opposite sides of the fucking planet.
Amado Gomez takes care of his older brother's grave. Homero Gomez was an environmental activist. He disappeared on January the 13th and was later found dead.
He was our pillar of strength. He always encouraged and supported us. My brother was the greatest. I don't think you can ever get over such a loss. He'll always be in my heart, and I will always look up to him.
But that's a legacy that creates differences. But Paula wants to know why, which is where the science comes in, or might come in. Is there anything in our biology that explains why men are more likely to become leaders? Or is this a case of each generation repeating what they've learned from the previous one?
No, you go first.
Let's start with an obvious difference. Men are just bigger.
3 or 4 steps
I
behind
can
you.
see how stronger people might have dominated back when societies were based on who could punch the hardest. So has being stronger and bigger given males the edge, which translates into dominance
bigger
today?
and stronger isn't
Here's
necessarily
Angela
because we're
Saini,
male. That
journalist
could be
and
because of
author of Inferior, a
stereotypes
book
that have
about
been
how science has got women wrong.
But we have to remember that not all men are stronger than all women, not all men are bigger than all women, and we know that, from personal experience. We can see it when we look outside. And certainly, the fact that we have matrilineal societies, that we have societies that are egalitarian among humans, suggests that just because men are on average a little bit bigger than women or a little bit stronger than women doesn't necessarily mean that things would have inevitably turned out this way. So I think we have to appreciate that physical strength may be a part of the puzzle, but it certainly doesn't explain everything.
Thanks, Angela. We have part of the answer for Paula. If you're wrestling over the TV remote control, being bigger and stronger does give you an advantage. But we do have some human societies ruled by women, so being bigger doesn't necessarily mean men are in charge. So far, I've been thinking about men possibly being top dogs because of their physical strengths. But in the modern world, a good leader needs mental strength. Studies have shown that people who emerge as leaders are more likely to be more ambitious, social, curious, and have higher IQs. That's where we should focus. Do men run stuff because they have more suitable brains than women? It's certainly what scientists thought when they first noticed that, on average, men's brains are bigger than women's.
Compared to the original.
Gina Rippon
It's not how well it
is Professor
functions,
of
it's does
Cognitive
it, like, how
Imaging
close
at
to the
Aston
original.
University in the UK and has written a book on the gendered brain.
There are actually almost no differences.
Women avoid head
consistent
injuries by being
differences,
shorter.
which is a surprise
first
to
of
people
all.
because we
Yes,
have
you
a
do.
long-standing belief that there is a female brain or a male brain.
I'm 6'2",
But
the
certainly,
door's 6'6", the
as yet,
ceiling's 8
there is
foot.
nothing clearly
I
which
still hit my head off the
differentiates a
wall
human
sometimes.
female brain from a human male brain.
But their brains are bigger than ours,
I'm not making
right?
that up.
Yes,
But that's
on
probably 'cause I'm
average,
skinny.
men's
I
brains are
was
about
fat.
10% bigger than women's
That's
brains, and
fine,
that's really the only consistent difference we've found after a couple of hundred years. But that's because men,
Look,
on
if we're
average,
successful,
are
we get
about
fat,
10%
we get
bigger
heart problems,
than
breathing
women. So it's
problems,
just a
we
scaling
smoke, we
issue.
drink.
And if you correct for the volume differences
Yeah, all
in
that
brains
leads to
between males and
joint
females,
problems and muscle
then all the
problems, and you move
differences
around
which
even
have been
less, and
trumpeted
then the
far and
reward
wide
cycle
actually
of food
disappear.
So
just
if you
goes
had a
crazy.
brain in a
We're not wired
dish
for
in
this.
front
We're
of
not
you,
built for this.
you wouldn't be able to go, oh, male brain or female brain.
Absolutely, and that's a great way of thinking about it. If I had lots and lots of brains, I'd say probably on average the bigger ones were from men and the smaller ones were from women, but there would be an overlap. But there's no one part of the brain which we can reliably point to and say, that shows that's a brain from a man.
Okay, so that was easy. There are no significant differences between the brains of men and women, so we can't say men's bigger brains are making them natural leaders. But, and again,
it concurs for the most
this
part.
is a controversial area. Scientists disagree about how different
I think I'm
male
proving
and
right now
female
we're not
brains
built
really
for
are.
survival here.
Here's Kevin Mitchell, professor in developmental neurobiology at Trinity College Dublin, and author of Innate, How the Wiring of Our Brains Shapes Who We Are. Kevin disagrees with Gina. He thinks there are significant differences between the brains of men and women, and they need to be
4
there.
years to do this
There
thing,
are
5
absolutely
years to do this
differences
thing with
in the
this light
brains between
strand,
men and women
because it involves
for
water
very good reasons.
and electricity.
Because there are some important behavioral differences between men and women that have to be pretty much pre-wired into the brain through different programs of development that wire up male and female brains slightly differently. And most of those behavioral differences are directly to do with reproduction or sexuality in some way as well. So there has to be some differences between the brains of males and females to drive those kinds of
Well, then how do you explain homosexuality? Hold on. You were the station. No, that was the other one.
A load of questions
you've
about
run
what
this shit a lot
else could
too.
be different between the brains of men and women.
How do you explain
I've spoken to
homosexuality?
Gina Rippon, and she says that there just aren't any. And, you know, if you had a brain in a dish, you'd be hard pushed to tell whether it was male or female.
In the brains of men and women, there are a few very small structures, things that control aspects of reproductive behavior, for example, parts of the brain called the hypothalamus. That really are different. And you know, if you had a slide of a dissection of the male and female brains, you could tell the difference because there's an area that's about 6 times larger in males than in females, for example. And that's just one. There are many others that are like that, but you can only see those under the microscope, basically.
And those differences, can we extrapolate them through to differences in behavior?
Not really, not directly. I mean, we do see differences in behavior, and we see differences in anatomy and functional parameters, but we can't really say that the differences we see in the brain measures cause the differences in behavior. Frankly, we can't do that for hardly any differences in behavior, not even just sex differences, anything at all. There really aren't very good known brain parameters that correlate with, say, how extroverted somebody is, or how nurturing they are, or how conscientious they are. Any of those personality traits, those differ between people, and brains differ between people, but we haven't been able to find what it is in the brain that correlates with those things. And it's probably because there is frankly, not a direct relationship between one bit of the brain and one behavior.
So Kevin says there are differences within the brain which, unlike Gina, he considers significant. But these differences don't currently tell you if someone's going to be more ambitious or social or any other personality trait for that matter.
Even he missed the point. I can tell
Crowd
the
Science
difference.
has
Okay,
spoken to
but this
two
is
very
different,
good
this, that,
scientists with
right,
decent
that was the
reasons
original
for their
question,
different
wasn't it?
conclusions.
Stupid.
But this idea of
smart you
looking
are,
into
how
our
smart,
brain to
stupid.
find sex differences, or no sex differences, is a hot topic. There are people desperate to show that men and women are alike, or
Don't
that
tell me
men
you don't
are
have
from
some of their
Mars
brains
and
in
women are
charge. You got
from Venus.
everybody's brain
So
in
you
charge.
do get a lot of arguments, often based on flimsy evidence. Who's right? Angela Saini has researched the culture behind the research into sex difference, and I asked her for answers.
I think we have to remember that science exists in the real world. It doesn't sit outside it. It is part of society. These are human beings doing these things. They've also been affected by their own biases and prejudices when they ask the questions that they do. When women started entering the sciences in very large numbers after the Second World War, when they started becoming professors in the 60s and 70s, we saw many outdated pseudoscientific ideas about women and men suddenly being debunked. And the reason for that is when you only have a certain mindset, or you only have a certain set of stereotypes that you're working within, then of course whatever you come up with, whatever theories you propose, are going to reflect that. When you have a broader set of ideas, a wider set of perspectives, including the female perspective, but class perspectives, all of that, then I think you get a truer picture, more reliable picture of who we are, just because different questions are being asked.
A fun game is to go back 150 years and laugh at the hilariously wrong ideas that respectable scientists used to have to explain why women had not added the same quantity of knowledge to the journals as men. Darwin, in keeping with men of his time, thought
they weren't
women,
allowed to.
Though generally superior to men in moral qualities, are inferior intellectually.
On examining my own bias, I have to admit that, for example, 2 weeks ago when Crowd Science looked at how we navigate, I was a little crushed to hear that women are generally not as good as men. You can find that show and many other episodes of Crowd Science on BBC Sounds. Anyway, let's get back to the science. Kevin's rationale is that when he looks at the animal kingdom, he sees many other mammals with big differences between the sexes.
Yeah,
We're animals too.
By the way,
Why should we be any
Y
different?
chromosome,
and those differences
a
come down
mutation.
to sex or reproduction.
That just
In
means
other species,
we're all
the more
closely
dominant
related to those
male
animals if you
usually
want to
gets to
admit it.
mate more, which means it's a trait that gets passed on, which means there might be a decent evolutionary reason for men to have certain personality traits.
So males tend to have more dominant personalities than females. One reason why that might be comes back again to reproductive competition. It pays off for males to mate with many females where it doesn't pay off for females. That means males will be competing for females, and one way that they do that is by establishing dominance. What that means is there may be a biological underpinning that could be expressed in modern society in a way that men want to be dominant over particularly other men, actually, because it suppresses their mating options and prioritizes my mating options. And also, that's a kind of a competitive arena, and there may be a natural inclination to be competitive that also differs between males and females, or that manifests in different ways. And of course, it's also true that once you start with that biological trait, then once men are in leadership positions, that they may well engender cultural practices that favor them remaining in leadership positions.
This idea that a lot of, in quote, natural male characteristics are important. Maybe that's just a myth that's been spread about by people that have those natural male characteristics.
Well, I think the observation is probably true, that you see in business that it is quite aggressive, it's overtly competitive, you do get domineering personalities rising to the top. There's no reason why we should accept that that's the case, or accept that kind of, macho culture, that is just the way that it has to be. And we're seeing as more and more women come into those leadership roles that actually you don't have to act in that way necessarily.
It's a plausible theory. Domineering tendencies evolved as a mating strategy are transferred into general competition for success and power. But does being domineering and aggressive make you a leader? Studies say that leaders are more likely to be ambitious, but a leader doesn't have to be aggressive. We've looked at physical size, brain difference, and evolutionary pressures, none of which can offer a definitive reason for male dominance in positions of leadership, and all of which are welded to the societies that shape us. So let's have a deeper look at that. Just a reminder, you're listening to Crowd Science on the BBC World Service. We make a longer version of this show for our podcast, where this week we talk to Ingunn, who grew up in Iceland, the most equal country in the world. To hear what they do differently, download our podcast from BBC Sounds, or wherever you get your podcasts. And do rate us whilst you're there. I briefly mentioned the traditional roles of women, and I think it's fair to say that unequal expectations in child-rearing practices play a huge part in preventing women from achieving parity. It's everywhere, in every country, this idea that keeping house and raising a family is primarily a mother's role. Of course, all cultures are so different, so I thought we'd get a global snapshot.
Growing up as a female in mainland China is kind of an interesting experience because before we took the college entrance examination, everyone was under extreme pressure. So the teacher gathered all the girls in the class and then talked to us and said, oh, you guys actually don't need to be that nervous. Even if you didn't do that well in the college entrance examination and cannot get to the top university for the country, you can still go to a relatively good school in the province, and then you just get married to a good guy, and that's it. You don't need to worry about anything else.
When my son was 3 years old, I asked my Australian employer to work for 4 days a week instead of 5 so that my wife could go back to work. And initially my request was denied. I had to lay the sexual discrimination card and point out to them that every woman in the organization that made the same request was approved, but you denied mine. So eventually I did get my request approved, but I never got a promotion since. It tells you something about Australian culture, I think.
In Iceland, I felt that I had opportunity to pursue whatever I wanted. I remember at one point, just at the dinner table, my father saying something like, of course I want equal opportunities for all my children, because you're the ones that are going to take care of me.
Thanks to Shan, Moshi and Ingunn. The way we behave is shaped by the way we're raised, and boys and girls will almost certainly have a different experience, if not from their parents, then from wider society and their peers. And that stereotyping starts young. To be honest, we make a big deal of a child's sex before they're even born. Pink and blue decorations form part of a current fashion for gender reveal parties, where people gather together to reveal and celebrate an unborn baby's sex. Even something as innocently meant as the gift of a toy is laden with expectation. Here's Angela Saini.
When I was young, I don't remember going into toy stores and there being, an aisle full of pink toys and an aisle full of blue toys. But now when I take my son to the toy store, I see that. And it has a huge impact on the choices that we make, because it's very difficult as a parent to have a son or a daughter and go down the aisle that you think is not gender appropriate for them and to pick a toy from there, because you feel, will people judge them? What does that mean? Maybe these toys aren't designed for this type of person. We forget that children are just children and they're all pretty much the same. So if you give a boy more construction toys to play with, or things that exercise his mechanical abilities, building things or making things, then his brain will develop in that direction. If you don't give these things to a girl, her brain won't develop in that direction.
From a young age, a child is learning what's expected of them as a boy or a girl, and this is literally rewiring their brains. I mentioned earlier being disappointed to find out that women are generally less good at navigating than men. What's fascinating is that the extent of that deficiency correlates to the level of equality in each country, which shows that it's not a case of males having more able navigational brains. It's that in some cultures, boys are given the opportunity to develop that skill. Boys and girls get more than gendered toys. Right? They often receive different ideas about what is and isn't acceptable behaviour. You know the saying, boys don't cry?